views expressed on this program by its guests do not necessarily reflect the views or beliefs of the host or radio network. And this program's sole intent is to help educate, foster critical debate, and help raise and discuss political and social issues which already exist in the public domain. Thank you and enjoy the program.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network and also at 21stCenturyWire.com. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode 344 of this weekly Omnibus News and Analysis radio program, brought to you here again on ACR. I am your host, Patrick Henningsen. We've got a powerful show lined up for you again this week, and we have a special guest who's going to be joining us at the top of the hour. He is an author. He's a writer and a researcher into world and geopolitical affairs. His name is Richard K. Moore, and he's also featured in the new special edition of New Dawn magazine, the Great Reset edition. There's a link to it on the show page right now. Richard's going to be joining us from Ireland, and I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. I've read some of his work. It's absolutely fascinating, and we're going to be talking about how to break out of the matrix. And so, you know, the allegory of the matrix isn't so much fiction anymore. We're beginning more and more to realize and see and experience in our own lives how narratives and how information is constructed in such a way, how our realities are constructed in such a way by algorithms, by things that are being beamed at us. And Richard's going to be talking about how to break out of that bubble, what sort of things that he's discovered over his many years of research, over decades, in fact. And we're going to be looking into that technology, and it's going to be a fascinating conversation. So I'm very much looking forward to connecting with him at the top of the hour. Basil Valentine is on hiatus this week, but he will be back to join us next week. So looking forward to that. Now, the theme of today's show is, what if you're right and they're wrong? And this is kind of a rhetorical question, but it's also a personal question, because there's a lot of people out there who've thought or who are constantly thinking, what if I'm right and they're all wrong? So, or, you know, how is it possible? How can you be right and everyone else be wrong? How could I be right and everyone else be wrong? Have you often thought of that? I'm sure a lot of you listening have. And it's incomparable. You know, how could you be right and everyone else be wrong? All the experts, all the pundits, all the political leaders, and they're all wrong and you're right? Or the small minority is right? How can you know better than what everybody else is saying, the media, the political leadership, the experts, the doctors, the scientists? How's that possible? How is that even possible? It seems impossible, right? It seems impossible. And so, but if you break this down, it's not impossible. It's not impossible. Let me explain this to you. And we'll get on to talk about some of the big stories. Obviously, we'll sink our teeth into the latest in the U.S. election. We'll also talk a little bit about the COVID lockdowns that are coming, apparently that looks like they're coming, at least in the UK here and possibly in parts of America. But so what about, who are all these experts? How's this possible? How can you be right and everyone else can be wrong? And people have challenged you with that. I'm sure if you hold alternative views or if you hold unorthodox views on any main subject or anything that's sort of hot and in the news and in the national conversation, COVID, lockdowns, the pandemic is a good example, obviously. If you hold anti-orthodox views, people are saying, well, how can you be right? I've just heard such and such. I just heard Dr. Fauci. I saw a whole panel of experts on CNN and MSNBC, and they're saying exactly the opposite of what you're saying. So how could you possibly be right? Let's break it down. So the experts, you've got the experts, you've got the political punditry, you've got the science pundits, you've got political leaders, okay? Those are the three main groups there: the experts, the pundits, and the political leaders. That's quote everybody. That includes the media, by the way, because the pundits are in the media. So that's everybody. Let's break those three groups down. Well, the political leadership, if you're still trusting politicians that they're going to be right and they're not going to be lying to you, then you're off in Alice in Wonderland, and I consider you're probably a lost cause in terms of me explaining this. So, I mean, anybody who trusts the word of politicians and government and thinks that they're sacrosanct and they only tell you the truth, come on. So that's one of the main pillars of everybody else. So you can remove that pillar. So now we're down to two pillars. We've got the experts and the pundits. So how many times have the pundits been wrong on television? I can name off a couple of wars. I can name off some chemical weapons plots. I can name quite a few things. I can pull a dozen examples out of history. Okay, major events where the pundits were wrong, were completely wrong, and are still wrong in some cases. Some of them still clinging to the old narrative, incredibly. So the punditry class that you see on TV, these people that they wheel them in these kind of panels. And some of them are journalists, some of them are lobbyists, think tankers, some of them are celebrity doctors in some cases. So all those pundits, they can be wrong. They can be totally wrong. So that's the second pillar of everybody else. So now we're down to one pillar. So you see, this looked daunting when I asked you this question to begin with. Seems like you're up against a big wall, right? An establishment wall. I've just stripped out two of those pillars that are traditionally completely unreliable and more often wrong than right, in fact. So now we're down to the experts. So who are the experts? Well, we've got the doctors, we've got the scientists, we've got the worst. The worst of the worst is government health officials. These are the worst of the worst, because they're worse than the scientists and the doctors because they work for the government. So they're automatically, everything they do is political. And in terms of COVID, in this conversation, the pandemic, government health officials have politicized epidemiology. They've politicized virology. They've politicized science. Science is highly politicized. If you think it's all about the scientific method and empirical evidence, yes, I have a bridge to sell you. Very long one, in fact. The 7-mile one connects Key West to Florida. I'll sell you that one. It's very long. So those are the experts. And then even worse, you've got people with the title of doctor next to their name, and their whole career has been in the corporate pharmaceutical world. So there's automatically a conflict of interest there. So you can kind of cancel them out straight away, because their position in government, if they're a science advisor or a chief medical officer, like Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance in the UK, advising the Tory government, they're all basically fully bought and paid for, owned. Their whole careers they owe to the pharmaceutical industry or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who are funding Chris Whitty's research, for instance, $41 million. So you can kind of move them right out of the way. So doctors also have conflicts of interest. They are, I don't care who you are, if you're in the allopathic medicine industry, you have some interactions with the drug companies, or the pharmaceutical companies, or you are in league with the medical industrial complex. There's no way you can't be, okay? A very rare occurrence do you find doctors that will speak independently outside of that sphere. And if they do, they will be roundly attacked. They'll be roundly attacked and they'll be smeared. And we've seen it with the frontline doctors in America, and we've seen so many examples of this. Then you've got the scientists, and you've got other experts, okay? So, and that's, well, then we have a debate. We have a lively discussion here. We can interrogate claims made by scientists, by experts, and more often than not, it's not exactly straightforward. What their proposition is not straightforward, and in many cases is political, and in many cases they feel the pressure of institutions that are getting their money from some of these third parties that I've just mentioned. So that's your third pillar. And yes, they can be wrong. And yes, historically, they have been wrong. So then we ask the question, how could you be right and everyone else be wrong? Is that possible? And I'm going to say, yes, it is. I'm going to say, this wouldn't be the first time in history that they, quote, they got it all wrong. And, years later, a few people might fall on their sword, and some people might admit it. There'll be an inquiry or government special investigation or committee, and they'll interview all the main players, and they'll be lamenting their short-sightedness at the time. And yes, we were under tremendous pressure, and we may have got this wrong, and so forth. We all know that song and dance, and it's coming. Trust me. And this one will be drawn out over a long period of time, if it's not buried under a heap of the next crisis, which is our biggest fear, in fact, right now. So if you break this down to a meta level, what if all of the experts are, I'll use an allegory from Plato's Republic, what if all the experts are chained, shackled, and they're in the cave as well? In other words, there are people who are in, positions of authority in high up in institutions, and they've got absolute blinders on. They have no idea what's going on. They don't see the big picture. They're a cog in a bigger machine. They know what's going on in their cubicle, and when they go and march to the boardroom and have the meeting and etc., that's what they know. Their job to execute as a cog in the wheel of a bigger machine. So who's watching the watchers? If the watchers are chained, shackled to the ground, looking at the shadows, as in Plato's Republic, the allegory of the cave, who's watching them? That's the big question. Who's keeping the experts in check? Who's overseeing this is the danger of relying on a scientific elite to dictate government and policy. There's nobody keeping the experts and the doctors in check in that case, because the politicians are so afraid of getting it wrong, or not acting strong enough, or not doing enough, and then having a death toll on their hands. And by the way, that problem is going to be intensified after the last 7 months. They're going to be more paranoid and afraid, gosh, any bug could fly in, and they'll all be basically, running for the bathroom, basically. This is a really dangerous precedent that's been set. that we must look at the worst possible scenario and gear all of our policies and all of our responses around the worst possible scenario. And some people say, well, that's just, we're playing it safe. No, you're not. That's like taking out an RPG to kill a mosquito on your wall. You blow up the whole house just to kill a mosquito. That's where that attitude takes us, and that's exactly what's happened. This is exactly where we are now. And you might think they're going to learn from this, and these people that we elect, no, they're not. I'm telling you now, potentially, if this is not brought to heel immediately, it will be worse the next time around. And the media is already geared towards this. The media thrives off crisis, because with crisis, people tend to be glued to television 24-hour news networks like CNN and MSNBC and Fox and the rest of them. So it helps their ratings and it feeds into their business model. Any war, any crisis, a pandemic, a flood, or whatever, a disaster, they live for it. So you have the UK, the US model, which is the Stalinist model. And this is based on, so they don't trust the people at all. There's zero social contract between the government and the citizens, or the government and subjects in the case of the UK. That's the big takeaway. That's the big lesson from this COVID crisis. That in the West, the bastions of democracy, there is absolutely no social contract to speak of. And the government has proven it by its actions, by its deeds, by its statements, by its manipulative policies and shaming people and blaming the public if that the cases are surging, and using fraudulent science and misrepresenting data and testing and everything to create the illusion of a major pandemic right now, or a major second wave that doesn't exist. To spin up a crisis out of nothing. This is what the state's doing to save face for the mistakes they've made in the past, over the past 7 months. They want to bury that under a new crisis. And so somehow at the end of it, that we'll all turn to the state and say, oh, thank you so much for saving us. Thank you so much. If it wasn't for you locking us down and locking us up and taking away our freedoms and eviscerating our communities and destroying our educational institutions and stopping sports and entertainment and live music and the arts, if it wasn't for you, thank you so much for denying us all of these frivolities, all of these indulgences that were putting us all at risk, because now we're safe. We have nothing. We don't have hardly a life worth living, but we're safe. Thank you so much, government. Thank you. Thank you very much. So you compare that with the Swedish model. The Swedish approach, or the Swedish model, you have a social contract where the government turns to the people and they say, we trust you. This is what we recommend. Please follow it. We understand that some of you might have extenuating circumstances. Well, you have to make your own decision, but we trust you. And it's a totally different attitude. It's a totally different atmosphere. And so hence, countries like Sweden didn't lock down. Not anything to speak of. They did some social distancing. That's basically it. They're not running around looking like it's 24/7 Halloween right now with designer Louis Vuitton masks and stupid things over their faces. They're not doing that. And they haven't done it from the beginning. And they didn't close the kids' schools. And guess what? No second wave. It's over. It's just another seasonal respiratory illness virus amongst dozens of others that arrive, come, and go every year. That's Sweden's reality. They have a social contract. So if anything, we've learned that the social contract is basically all talk in the democratic West. It's all talk, a lot of high talk. And when we are the guardians of democracy and freedom, and we shall export it at the barrel of a gun, because we just have got it so right in the West. And so the Great Barrington statement is up online, and this is a group of scientists, many of whom we featured from the beginning at 21st Century Wire. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford, Dr. Sunetra Gupta from Oxford University, and others. There's a Harvard epidemiologist in the group as well. And they put this statement up online, and people are signing it, and they are getting absolutely smeared, and they're getting shadow banned by Google. So the biggest search engine in the world has made it invisible to find this. All you can find when you type it in over the last couple of days, I don't know about today, I haven't checked, but all you can find is all these hit pieces and smear pieces, because these doctors have advocated a common sense approach to herd immunity, more or less what you're seeing in Sweden. But it goes against the whole World Economic Forum, US, UK government's approach of, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation approach of synthetic immunity. Lockdown, wait for the vaccine. Everybody get a vaccine. That's the corporate, the Stalinist approach, centralized corporate, the fascist approach. And the errand boys at Google and girls have saw fit to censor this. These are top epidemiologists, some of the best in their field, and they've tried to make it invisible on the world's biggest search engine. And they do this, and they do it regularly, and we've had experience with it because we were blackballed, 21st Century Wire, from Google in this exact fashion from April 2017. April 2017. So we lost access to a huge audience. We were put on a blacklist along with many other websites, and everybody all of a sudden, when they flicked the switch in April 2017, our traffic dropped 70%, 7-0, in terms of referrals coming from there, and that's a big source of daily referrals, obviously, is the world's biggest search engine. So we are basically expunged from that in terms of organic searches. How do you survive when that happens? I don't know. We're here. We're here by the grace of God and our great listeners and readers at 21st Century Wire and our members and everybody else. But that would wipe out a lot of businesses, and it did, and it will, and it has. But worse than that, to cover up information that's in the public interest, that could help governments, could help states, cities make more common sense decisions in terms of based on, the information that's the new data that's available. And the oligarchs and the gatekeepers at Silicon Valley want to keep you from seeing that. That is a dangerous state of affairs. This isn't just about politics anymore. They're censoring information about public health. They're censoring information that's superior to what is being touted by Emperor Fauci, by the Chuckle brothers in Britain, Boris's two science advisors, Whitty and Valance, the GlaxoSmithKline brothers. What the Great Barrington statement has is scientifically superior. It's more balanced. It is a more pragmatic approach. It takes historical epidemiology into account, all of the things that the governments haven't done in the lockdown countries. It addresses all of those things. And it says that everybody should, especially those who aren't in a risk group, that's AKA most of the population, should go about their daily business. No masks, no social distancing, nothing. No bubbles at school, none of this nonsense. And Anybody who considers to be vulnerable, quote, vulnerable, it's their decision whether they shield themselves away from the world or not. And guess what? We're back to common sense. We're back to where we were a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. No new normal, no great reset, none of that. So if you want to know who the enemy is in this story, look at who's trying to shut that down. Silicon Valley's trying to shut that down. They want to have the ascendancy of their empire, of their world order, their new normal, the Jeff Bezos empire. We put a feature up on the Sunday screening today, our weekly documentary, Bezos' Amazon empire, a little look behind the scenes at Amazon. His fortune is growing almost exponentially compared to regular retail, high streets, main streets. He's devouring them, he's killing them, he's crushing them, especially under the lockdown situation because he has an unfair advantage. I mean, these are the people, these same Silicon Valley people, this same cartel, censoring information that's in the public interest on COVID that could keep lockdowns from happening. That is a problem. That's a huge problem. That's what we're up against. Don't think it's not happening because it is. So look at the propaganda that's coming out. I'm just going to share this one with you. This was in the Daily Express. The Daily Express, it's a tabloid. Mind you, it's kind of a trashy tabloid. But anyway, front page yesterday, this headline, I tweeted this at 21 Wire if you want to go check out a little masterclass in about 5 tweets. Virus strategy, trip to the pub, virus tragedy, trip to the pub, killed my dad. So this is a typical tabloid story. Is it true? Are these quotes real? I don't know. But this is the propaganda they're pelting the British public with, because the government just put a 10 p.m. curfew on all pubs, and they're shutting down pubs in local lockdowns. So where they think the virus is surging, where there's 150 cases, quote, per 100,000 people, they'll shut down the pubs in the area and do local lockdowns. So this is what they want to do across the country. So they want to get most of the country on lockdown through local lockdowns. So the government's not seen to be making sweeping decrees, but yet they're doing it anyway by fiat. And so an anguished son, this is the story by Steph Spiro, it sounds like a pen name. An anguished son whose father died after contracting COVID in a pub has pleaded for everyone to stick to the government safety rules. I mean, straight off the bat, you can tell that's just an egregious piece of propaganda. So Gordon McPherson, who would have been 82 on Tuesday, and right there, the red flag goes up, would have been 82 on Tuesday, died last month, just 3 weeks after testing positive. So it doesn't say what level of infection he has. It doesn't talk about much in terms of details. He tested positive and he died at 82. Mind you, the average age of a person in the UK, life expectancy is about 80. So he's already 2 years above the average age of Britain. But somehow this is a COVID death, and he died because he went to the pub. So they continue. It follows his first outing to the pub since March to watch the football. His son Alex told the Daily Express his father had no underlying health conditions and had always followed lockdown rules. I'm sorry, but anybody who's in their 80s has some underlying health conditions. That's just farcical to make that statement. Okay, there are people who are fit as a fiddle, but even Anthony Fauci, the Olympic athlete, Anthony Fauci, as sprightly as he is at 82, he's probably got some underlying health conditions. Everybody does. It's called old age. I know this might be a big shocker to some liberal listeners out there if you dare to listen to this show, but yes, we do, get underlying health conditions in our older age. It happens. People actually get old. Some even die. So apparently the granddad has missed going to his local, and he wanted to watch his favorite football team. And this happens. And so he supposedly catches COVID. And they claim that they knew this because of the government's track and trace system. So this looks like a propaganda advert for the government. How is any of this true? How could you know he caught it from the pub if he tested positive 3 weeks later? How could you possibly know of all the potential interactions that you might have around town with your family and so forth? No, but they've all got it figured out. And the Sun's making statements like, this will go on forever. People don't do what they're told, says the Sun, Alex. I mean, this is clearly a nudging exercise. This is kind of an egregious piece of propaganda, using the death of an 82-year-old to shame people for going to the pub to watch football, saying that you're going to die of COVID if you go to the pub. I mean, it's ridiculous. So what I see with this, I could go on. The whole thing is just an incredible piece. But what I see with this is a level of desperation that's set in, that they have really jumped the shark on this. They've jumped the tiger shark. It's so big. And the level of propaganda is just going to get really, really desperate. And they've lost their scientific argument already. They've lost the debate. They're in censorship mode now. So the state is in propaganda and censorship mode simultaneously. So this is this is Stalin's Soviet Union, basically. Censorship and propaganda mode simultaneously. It's like they're trying to sell a war at home, like World War II, or like a major war close to home. I mean, this is a war. We've said this on the show before. This is a war. Make no mistake about it. We're at war right now. Let me show you how ridiculous this is getting. Here's a clip from Australian television. This is Chairman Dan Andrews, who's chairman of the breakaway Victoria State, the People's Republic of Victoria, formerly part of Australia. I jest, but not really. But listen to this. 14-day quarantine's not enough. Now it's 21-day quarantine. Believe it or not, 21-day quarantine. Listen to this. This is Dan Andrews here, Chairman Dan from Melbourne, Australia. Go ahead and roll it.
I've got another announcement to make today that from 11:59 p.m. on the 11th of October, a person who's been deemed a close contact by the Department of Health and Human Services must get tested for coronavirus on day 11 of their quarantine period. That testing is not mandatory as such, but if a person chooses not to take that coronavirus test on day 11 to establish that they are virus-free at that point, then their mandatory quarantine period will be extended by a further 10 days. Now, it is important, and from, again on the same timeline, 11:59 p.m. October 11, businesses in regional Victoria will be required to take all reasonable steps to determine where a person is from before they are seated, for instance. This will have different applications in different settings, but there is a fine, there is a penalty of nearly $10,000, which is the standard business penalty for not complying with other parts of the COVID Safe plan. One important part about this is making sure that people from metropolitan Melbourne are only in regional Victoria for lawful purposes. Victoria Police obviously have the key role there in terms of roadblocks and checks, but there is also an important requirement that if you travel from metropolitan Melbourne into regional Victoria with a lawful reason, for a lawful purpose, the restrictions that apply to you in Melbourne travel with you. So, for instance, you could get a takeaway coffee, but you could not sit in a cafe or a restaurant, a pub, a bar. That's just not an option for you because you're coming from a...
That was Chairman Dan. And look at the level of intrusion there. So now you have to justify whether you're moving within the Victoria state, whether it's lawful. So the state's going to determine what your activity is, what your travel is, whether that's lawful. So what was your right 12 months ago Now you have to justify to the state where it's going to tell you if it's lawful to have a coffee and to sit down at that table and to get in your car and drive to see a friend or whatever. That there's restrictions now on everything. And this is what happens when you allow the state, when you allow the government, when you give it carte blanche. You give them an inch like this, or you give them a few feet and they take a few miles. And are they ever going to give it back? Will they ever give it back? That's the big question. And it certainly doesn't look like it, especially from the language that we're saying. And we're judging them by their actions, not by their words. Their actions are pretty clear that they are not prepared to give away any of the new powers and restrictions, and they haven't even finished rolling out what they want to roll out. I'm talking about identity passports, immunity passports, digital passports with your vaccine records that's going to allow you to travel. This is definitely where it's going. And they don't even need to pass a law. This is the important part. All that needs to happen is that a few major, in terms of airlines, I'll give an example, a few major airlines or a few countries will adopt the policy. And if a few countries adopt the policy, then everyone has to adopt the policy in order to have ubiquitous international travel. And all the airlines will adopt the policy because they already did it with the war on terror. All the airports did it, and it became standard. Even though the threat wasn't there, it became standard. Even though the threat in many cases was being generated by the government itself, it still became standard. That was the beginning of the boiling process for the frog. And now they're turning up the heat just slightly. And this is the ultimate level of intrusion: biosurveillance, medical martial law, no longer theoretical. Now we're into the practical stage. So the question is, if you're complying with nonsensical, ridiculous mask rules and laws and social distancing and all of these things they're supposedly in place because there's a deadly plague about. And if nobody's challenging the provenance of these laws, rules, and regulations, in other words, what are they based on? What is the threat? Oh, but we don't know. But it's coming. Just wait a couple of weeks. It's coming. There's going to be a second wave. It's coming. If you're not challenging that, and you're rolling over for something as trivial and ridiculous as masks, and some people might be offended by me saying that. Sorry, masks aren't trivial. 200,000 dead Americans from COVID, and you're just making light of people suffering. No, I'm not. I will also challenge that big fat 200,000 number. You want to break that down? Let's look at every single recorded death of COVID. Let's see how many COVID deaths were caused by COVID as opposed to people who died with COVID and other multiple underlying chronic health conditions and comorbidities. Let's do an audit on that 200,000 plus number. Let's do that worldwide, and let's see if how much we can scrape off of that million figure that everyone was celebrating this past week. It was a celebration. We passed 1 million. It was almost like this. It was like this religious death cult. The media, everybody was almost in a sick kind of dark way, almost celebrating the fact that there's 1 million dead. And they would take that and then use that to bludgeon any dissenters over the head with. This is the lowest form of demagoguery. I mean, how much lower can you get? But it doesn't surprise me because this has become a kind of an acceptable political tool. Beating your political opponent over the head by, using the deaths. It's like our troops who died in Iraq, the pro-war lobby beat you over the head with that for years. You're disrespecting our troops. Our boys have given their lives for freedom and all that ridiculous talk. Okay, that's how the neocons beat the left over the head, or the anti-war movement over the head, with the dead bodies of U.S. soldiers. Forget about the million Iraqis. Forget about them. You can't beat anybody over the head with that. So they're doing the exact same thing here. They've just switched into another mode, which is, this is a war that's being waged by the state, by corporations, against the people. It's being waged by a cartel of corporations, of foundations, of philanthropists, and government. It's being waged by them and the media, which they own. It's being waged by that cartel against the people. There's a war on. Make no mistake about it. This is a war. That's how they're treating it. This is how the media coverage is running. This is how the government is treating it, like an emergency, like a war. It's in their rhetoric. They're even saying we need to make this like World War II. Bill Gates himself said that. Boris Johnson is using that rhetoric as well. Everybody's is latching on to this. This is like a world war. We need to mobilize, like war. They're trying to create what's called a living memory. They want future generations to look back and say, "Oh, the pandemic. Oh, I remember the pandemic." They'll say that to their kids. They're creating the living memory, but guess what? It's fabricated. It's fabricated. They have made it the living memory. The media, the government, these corporate powers, the Bill Gateses of the world, they're constructing your living memory. It's not necessarily representative of what the real threat of this coronavirus is, or even the numbers of victims. Not representative of any of that. Not representative of the threat that it might pose to you, the lethality of the virus. None of this. This is all built on top of a narrative that is being absolutely tightly managed, right up to the point where Google is censoring and shadow banning information all over their platforms. Facebook's at it as well. Even up to the level of mass coordinated censorship across multiple platforms. Every single YouTube video's got a COVID-19 strip under it, pointing you to Wikipedia or the National Health Institute or whatever. I mean, this is just beyond anything we've ever seen before. Imagine if they're doing that when we go to war with China or Russia. They point everybody to the BBC. Anytime you type in or put Russia or China in the title of your anti-war video, they throw out all these links and roadblocks on Facebook and Twitter, driving you to the U.S. government's website or the BBC. This is no different than that scenario. Like I said, we're at war. Understand it. So there we go. Now we've got a couple of minutes left, and so the U.S. election is starting to heat up a little bit, but Donald Trump came down with coronavirus, and so he has just been trolling the Democrats, trolling the press, driving around his SUV, really upsetting them all because he left the hospital. And is this president symptom-free? And he announces symptom-free. I don't believe what this president's telling us, and they're all just in a tailspin. So, Trump being the master of the media, which he is, he's got them all running around in circles. And if you watch the last debate, I'm pretty sure Donald Trump, we can safely say he steamrolled Joe Biden in that debate. I mean, Joe left wounded, basically. It was almost, I almost felt bad for Joe. I almost felt bad for him because Trump really steamrolled him. I mean, it was like Tyson and what is it, Michael Spinks? Was that fight lasted 90 seconds? Yeah, it was Mike Tyson, Michael Spinks. 90 seconds, like one round or something like that. Boom, knocked out. So, and the media will say, no, well, Biden won the debate, whatever. So then Trump gets COVID. That whole drama unfolds after the debate. And now The Commission on Presidential Debates announces the next debate will be a virtual debate, a Zoom debate. Imagine that. The presidents are going to debate on Zoom because of safety concerns. Well, we saw the vice presidential debate, which was this past week. It was Mike Pence, the vice president, and Kamala Harris, the vice presidential candidate on the Biden ticket. And they had to build plexiglass walls between the candidates so they're not releasing aerosol vapors on each other because of COVID risks. I mean, ridiculous. So they put up all these plexiglass barriers to protect everybody. I mean, come on. So they did it. They did a sort of live bit, but Joe and Trump can't. So they want to do it by Zoom. You got to be kidding me. So what does the Trump campaign say? The White House says, we're not going to do it. If it's on Zoom, we're not doing it. And the Democrats are saying, how dare the president reject this offer of doing a safe debate? You have to ask yourself the question, why would they want to do it on Zoom? Is it to protect Trump? Because Trump's, 70, he'll be 74 this year. He seems to be okay. He's recovered. He's running around raising hell. Biden's going to be 78 in January or November, next month. He's 77. He'll be 78 in a couple of weeks. They're doing it to protect Joe. So hashtag vulnerable Joe or hashtag protect Joe. You have to ask yourself, if it's such a risk of catching a coronavirus and, being incapacitated and dying, 78-year-old candidate that the Democrats are fielding, if he can't even do a debate face-to-face, what business does he have running for the president of the United States? Is he going to govern from inside a Pope mobile? It's going to be like John Travolta and the boy in the bubble, the president in the bubble. How ridiculous is this? The Democrats have to ask themselves the fundamental question. If this little, situation is making it impossible for him even to stand in a room, he's going to have to meet world leaders. What's he going to do that on Zoom? He'll be the first president to rule from the basement. Biden. This is a joke. This is beyond a joke. This is the farce, comical level that this has gone to. Now, this was a press conference that came a couple of days ago. So here's Joe Biden asked the same question that Donald Trump asked him, and he dodged during the debate. Are you going to pack the court? In other words, if the Trump administration appoints Amy Coney Barrett, then there's going to be a conservative majority, and the Democrats have promised that they're going to pack the court. In other words, they're going to add Supreme Court justices until they get a majority. So they're basically going to change the rules because they lost the last presidential election. Listen to this. Here he's challenged again by a member of the press. And listen to, Joe couldn't even answer the question. Listen to this.
I've got to ask you about packing the courts. And I know that
Sure.
You said yesterday you aren't going to answer the question until after the election. But this is the number one thing that I've been asked about from viewers in the past couple of days.
Well, you've been asked by the viewers who are probably Republicans who don't want me continuing to talk about what they're doing to the court right now.
Well, sir, don't the voters deserve to know?
No, they don't. I'm not going to play his game. He'd love me to talk about, and I've already said something on court pack. He'd love that to be the discussion instead of what he's doing now.
So there's Joe Biden, won't answer the question. The American people don't need to know what his views are. The reason is, and this was pointed out by a Houston radio host named Jesse Kelly on Twitter, a conservative radio host. He said that Biden is so frightened, he's terrified of the radical wing of the Democratic Party that want to pack the courts. They want to hear somebody say, we're going to break the rules, pack the courts, and force our social agenda down the throats of the country come hell or high water. The radical wing of the Democratic Party, the Democratic Socialists, they want him to say that. But he can't say that because he'll alienate the moderate majority of the party. So in other words, you have the Democrats use the mob, because it's convenient in the short term to use the mob. So they unleash the mob, whether that's to riot and loot and burn cities, post George Floyd, catering, pandering to the Black Lives Matter, radical Marxist lobby, basically. They pander to that, or they whatever, and defund the police. They were tossing that around very casually months ago, and all of a sudden you don't hear that from them anymore. But because Biden realizes this is suicide, he's going to lose the moderate working class, Democrat. He's going to lose all those Reagan Democrats. But what happens is you become a complete servant of the radical mob once you let that genie out of the bottle. And Barack Obama did this. He used the mob. He became, instead of being America's president, he became a president that represented first and foremost what Al Sharpton was commanding, which is the street mob. And Obama, for a short-term political gain, used that, and then he went from becoming this president that was going to, govern in all America and represent all of America, and he became a president for the radical left. And that's one of the reasons why Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, because the country became more divided as a result of the Obama presidency. Race baiting became a kind of normal activity from the White House. And they used the Justice Department in the most politicized of ways, along with the media. And so they've just moved that formula to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, to George Floyd, to BLM, defund the police, the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is a radical, globalized Marxist agenda. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, let's empty the pension funds and, quote, unlock the pension funds. That's what everybody put away for their retirement who worked their asses off. They want to rob all that and invest it in green tech. That's the Green New Deal, is that we don't have green, affordable, quote, sustainable energy to power our cities and our businesses and the world. No, we don't have that. But we're going to discover it. We promise we'll find it. Just give us $10 trillion and we'll create all these startups and unleash the creative power of whatever. And it's a gravy train. It's opening the door for a level of scamming that the world has never seen and will never see again. Because the end of that road is going to be the ultimate crash and burn. Okay, so the experts can get it wrong. The media can get it wrong, and the politicians can get it wrong, and they all do get it wrong, and they get it wrong time and time again. And this is the problem with centralized decision-making, power, and so forth. So, and the last thing we'll say is, we'll leave a couple of things till after the break. Nancy Pelosi has hatched a new plot to get rid of the president, invoking the 25th Amendment. We might hold that until after our next guest. We're going to connect Richard K. Moore in a couple of minutes, so this is going to be an incredible segment. We're looking forward to it. So we're going to take a short break. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. This is the Sunday Wire. Stick around for the next segment. It's going to be fantastic. We'll be right back.
Let's talk about the real world for a moment, shall we? Where you're not some wonderful lone wolf hero, but you're part of a team and you play your position. Because That's what America is, Mr. Jeffries. It's one big team. Now, this might be difficult for you to grasp, but I am a patriot. And a patriot is one who makes the right moral choice. Sometimes it takes a strong man to make that choice.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network and also at 21stcenturywire.com. Thank you so much for joining us. And before the break, we talked about our guest that we're going to have during the segment. He's waiting in the wings. But before we connect our next guest, I just want to say a big thank you and a big shout out to all of the people, all of our readers and listeners who've downloaded the Brave browser. There's a link on the show page. You'll see the banner for Brave all over our website. And those of you who've downloaded and using Brave, thank you very much for your help on this. Obviously, Brave supports independent publishers, so anytime you download it on your laptop, on your desktop, on your cell phone, your iPad, Brave will throw some back coins into the tip jar, and they're not worth a lot now, but if more people use Brave and the adoption increases, then that might be worth something. So that's a way that you can support us, but get a free, fantastic, great product from an ethical company. They don't track, they don't harvest your data. You can block out all the ads if you want. You can do all of that with the Brave browser. And a lot of people are very happy so far with Brave, and it's a company that's going from strength to strength. So we're happy to be working with Brave browsers. So our next guest is an author. His name is Richard K. Moore, and he's also featured in the new special Great Reset edition of New Dawn magazine that we talked about last week. There's a link to it on the show page. There's also a link to his website and book, Escaping the Matrix, How We the People Can Change the World. And he's joining us on the live link right now from the Republic of Ireland. Richard, how are you?
Hello. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to this.
Great to have you on. And I really enjoyed your piece in New Dawn. Also looking at your book cover here, and I see a rock face. I'm just going to ask, is that the giant causeways in County Antrim?
No, it's just, it really doesn't mean anything. It's just a picture that my publisher liked. And, so we just used it.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Richard. I know you've got a background in technology, but just tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to this point doing what you're doing right now in your life.
Yeah, well, I was in the computer industry. I worked at places like Apple and Oracle and startup companies before Apple that probably nobody would recognize the name of now. But I always worked at leading edge companies. So after 30 years of being in the software industry, it just, I suddenly got this feeling that basically my life was me related to corporations, doing things for corporations, getting paid, and I wanted to graduate from that. I wanted to be a citizen of the world, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I wanted to have a relationship to the world, to society, rather than to corporations. And I had been, thinking about a lot of political things and kind of had been radicalized in the anti-Vietnam War movement. And I decided I wanted to start researching and writing. And so to do that, I needed to get away from all the entanglements of my daily life. And so I decided to move to Ireland, where I didn't know anybody, and sort of start a new life. I said as a writer, but really to be a writer in the political realm, it really means to be learning and researching and talking with other people, and then writing what you learn. It's not a writer like writing novels, different concept of the word writer.
So the title of your article in New Dawn is, I love the headline. If you can explain us what the concept behind it is, Storming Fort Orthodox, Strategies to Break Through the Bubble. What is the concept? Explain what Fort Orthodox is.
Well, actually, that wasn't my title for the article. That New Dawn changed the title.
Okay.
I actually called it, my title was Orthodoxy and the Meaning of Events. And it grew out of, on Facebook. I publish things on Facebook, and they would all be what you call alternative views, like things like COVID is a scam, and global warming is a scam. Those would be the kind of things I'd be posting. But most of my friends back in Silicon Valley are, politically correct liberals. So they'd say, "What a nonsense article, Rich. What do you?" And then my friends here, they'd be arguing with my friends back in Silicon Valley, calling each other idiots. And so I just started thinking of this problem: is why is it so hard for people to have a conversation if they happen to have different beliefs? And I started thinking about how. Really, two things. Number one, how do beliefs get so deeply ingrained by the mainstream media? I mean, the people who follow the mainstream, they believe it as if they were well informed, They don't think of themselves as being subject to propaganda. And so I started thinking, how does that work? And then I realized that, like, 9/11 is the example I used throughout the article. So on the day 9/11 happened, so you're seeing these images of the planes running into the Twin Towers and the big explosions, and then later you see the towers falling down. At the very first images, when you start seeing all this, already there's a banner at the top of the screen that says, "United States under attack by Al-Qaeda," Now you might wonder, how in the world did they know that already? And if they knew that already, why didn't they do something about it? That's one set of questions. But the point is that right in the middle of this traumatic event, you're already being told who did it, why they did it, what it means. And from a psychological point of view, that first explanation you get during a traumatic event goes deep into your psyche. And it's very hard to displace after that. So I began to see that as a general pattern. Whenever there's a dramatic change or a big event in society, the mass media always tells you immediately what it means, right? So like with COVID, as soon as you hear about COVID, you already hear that it's this deadly pandemic that's killed millions of people and the hospitals will be overflowed and you get all of that meaning as you're even learning that there's evidently some new virus around. And so I could see this pattern that the reason people are so committed to the mainstream view is because they've had these meanings deeply implanted, which makes them more or less impervious to contrary evidence. So anyway, maybe that's enough for me to say. Ask your next question.
Well, this is an interesting point because the indelible images of the COVID crisis back in late January, February, before the kind of the lockdown policies hit Europe and the West, the indelible images were like circulated through tabloids and the Daily Mail, like people dropping on the street dead in China, basically. Everyone has seen these videos. There's even one of someone jumping from the balcony or throwing their pets off of a 20-story apartment high-rise because they couldn't afford to get cat food or dog food because everything was locked down because of COVID. And people were, nailing their doors shut, or the government were nailing their doors shut so they couldn't get out, literally locking them in their houses. All of these tons of reports. And so you couple that with other reports that this is an airborne pathogen and it travels on surfaces and it's, 100 different ways that you can catch it. people are dropping like flies on the street in China. So the average person putting all of that together is saying like, oh, what? I hope it doesn't come here. And so then it comes, and then the fear. I think, I don't know what your opinion on this, Richard, is, but this penetrated much deeper than all of the previous psychological operations that you were talking about previously. This penetrates, and not just deeper, but from all sides. And what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, I didn't see those images. I mean, I don't watch TV myself. But I can see the effect it would have. And whether who knows whether they're real. Those might have been pictures from a long time ago about a different crisis, has nothing to do with COVID at all.
Exactly, yes.
I mean, BBC is always getting caught showing footage from one war and saying it's from another war, that kind of thing. And then I know they were showing, I did see the images on internet about tents outside the hospital in Italy, and supposedly Italy was, northern Italy was overflowing, and then there was a lot from New York. New York was supposedly an epicenter. So you get these scary, exactly. That's exactly what I was talking about in terms of psychological embedding. And then when then people, turns out actually, like in most countries, like here in Ireland, and all the hospitals are empty. There's really hardly any cases. But that fear is still there from that original psychological, what I would call a psyop,
So,
and and it's just where, like 9/11, consequences of 9/11 were the end of Constitution. Now you have all these terrorist laws. You can be arrested without cause and everything. B, the United States then's allowed to have wars wherever it wants because supposedly it's fighting terrorism. And then C, you can't travel without going through ridiculous security stuff. So, those were pretty big. But this COVID thing is much more intrusive. I mean, basically, they're destroying society. It's that simple. There's no more society. All the thing, going to football games or having music in pubs or even going to pubs. I mean, all of that. It's like if somebody had said a year ago, the government's going to do something and everything's going to stop. You'd say, oh, you and your conspiracy theories. It's almost unbelievable what's happened.
So how does one get to this point where you could be, you do a lot of research, you do a lot of reading to try to be as best informed as you possibly can about the things that you're planning on writing about. And so you're looking at data, you're reading multiple reports, you're triangulating your viewpoint because you want to make sure that you're on the right track, basically. But you also, have a previous career. You're working with very intelligent people, highly qualified, technically very savvy, brilliant people in the field of Silicon Valley and technology. But you could be coming at this issue from a completely different angle, and you might have 20 or 30 people that in that field, and they all have a completely opposite viewpoint of where you're coming from.
Well,
and there's nothing you can do to convince them otherwise. Do you run into that?
Oh yeah, all the time. And intelligence has nothing to do with it. How smart you are, how educated you are, how uneducated you are, seems to have no relationship to whether you're able to use your own judgment or not. Like, for instance, I have a friend, and we were talking about climate. So I gave him a climate. It shows the temperature for the last 10,000 years, and from the Greenland ice core records, you can see from that it was 2 degrees. It was 2 degrees warmer at the beginning of the Roman Empire, right? And we're afraid the temperature might go up a little bit. It's 2 degrees warmer then. The polar bears survived everything else. And so I showed my friend this, and he said, well, yeah, but how come all the experts say, It's like to allow yourself to have an opinion different than what you're told the experts say. I don't know what that takes. It's not about intelligence. It's certain independence of thinking. I don't know what it is really. But to be able to trust your own judgment is something that a lot of people just can't do. I mean, they'll trust their own judgment in their field, you know. But for something, but when it comes to politics or whatever, suddenly they have to hear what the New York Times says, or they have to hear what Rachel Maddow says, or they have to hear, if they're watching Fox, you know, they have to hear what they say, and then they get their opinion from that. They just can't, for some reason, can't think independently, and I don't know why. It's a mystery to me.
I mean, you mentioned the Novichok event, the Skripal poisoning in your piece, and a few others. I mean, you look at the official story, the official explanation, especially for that one in Salisbury, and then the wrapped perfume bottle that appeared 3 months later that supposedly killed somebody later. And if you challenge the official line on this or the other events that we talked about, you'll be smeared with the term conspiracy theorist.
Yeah,
Still after all years.
Well, Novichok was so interesting. It's like they claimed, here's these two people, they said the Russians poisoned them with a poison that one drop of it could kill everybody in London or something. And then they recover. But the thing I was looking at is, okay, if these two people were poisoned by Russia, then what a wonderful opportunity to show them in the hospital and show them with all these tubes and how terrible the Russians are, and look how these people are suffering, and then, oh, look, we're curing them and they're coming out of it, and now let's hear what they have to say, you know? I mean, that is how a poisoning by Russia would be treated in the media if it happened. It's a great propaganda opportunity. Well, no, we didn't see any of that. We don't see them in the hospital. We don't have interviews, you know? I mean, to see that, you know something's wrong. You know, it couldn't be what they said it is because they're not following through with what would have happened. So, I mean, the ability to look at what the media says and ask the right questions about it, I think that's the beginning of independent thinking, is seeing why what's being presented is inconsistent with...
There's a good sidebar in your article. It has a definition of the term conspiracy theorist. This definition says, conspiracy theorist is a person who accepts the political narrative of the day unquestioningly, consumes mainstream media like it was 1980, and is prone to submissiveness, outbursts of irrational fear, and public shaming of freethinkers.
Oh, I didn't write that. Somebody put that in.
Yeah, that's probably the editor there, but that's really flipping it. That's really flipping it on its head.
Yeah, and another thing along those same lines is, if you're talking about Russia or China or North Korea or Iran, then people will believe any conspiracy. Oh, they're really plotting, and then, they're lying, and then it's a conspiracy. Everybody else in the world does conspiracies, but only your own country doesn't do conspiracies. I mean, that, I think that's worth observing. Everybody's a conspiracy theorist when it comes to Putin, but for some reason, our government wouldn't do such a thing. I'd say another thing, too, is that, let me say something about how I got to where the kind of attitudes I have. When I first came over to Ireland to start writing, I thought my mission was to get conservatives to realize how wrong they are and how they should all adopt the correct liberal beliefs. That's how I started. And then it was a matter of as I started learning things, and it's like the scales started going from my eyes. I realized that liberals didn't have all the answers. And there's truth on all sides of the spectrum. And that, in fact, the whole left-right divide is really is something created as a divide and rule paradigm. If you keep people divided, fighting among themselves, then they're not opposing the government. And also, as I was learning more about history, if you go back, it's the truth about what happened. Let's say the Mexican War in 1825 or whatever it was. The truth about that is out now. And I read a book by the commander of the troops down on the Mexican border, and he talks about how he was given orders to provoke the Mexicans to give the United States an excuse to invade, and which where we got California and New Mexico and Arizona all as a result of the war. So the conspiracy theory back there is now a matter of public record. So as I learned about history, I realized the United States has always, every single thing they've ever done has been done through deception, false flags, blowing up our own battleship Maine, all those, you could see all those things in history. So when you realize it's always been that way, then it's not as difficult to recognize when it's happening now. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. You talk a lot about the reality bubbles in your work, and, looking at let's say from starting at the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was the kind of false pretext to bring the United States into the Vietnam War, and everything that came after that. Then you have 9/11, you have the Iraq WMD fraud, you have all these various crises, a few in Syria, a few alleged chemical weapons attacks, various Novichok attacks, and here we are with COVID. What I'm saying is, from that time of Vietnam, media was very different. The amount of media outlets, the way how deeply media had penetrated our personal space was very different, and to what we have today. And what I'm saying is, could they have engineered a global response to COVID back in 1970s like they have today? Is it really is technology propelling the crisis we have now, or could this have been accomplished 50 years ago?
Well, the nation state was stronger then. With globalization has been a systematic undermining of the nation state and replacing it, with privatization, corporations taking over. There's no longer is there Brit Rail. Instead, you've got all these independent rail companies. So this move away from the nation state as being the main political structure toward having global government being the main political structure, and the creation of all the globalist institutions, like the World Health Organization and the World Trade Organization, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole political emphasis is different now. At the time, back when the United States was fighting in Vietnam and stuff, the concept of nationalism and patriotism, that was all considered a good thing. Now of course they're calling it all an evil thing. But at the time, that was part of the propaganda, was be a good citizen and support your country. And so you can't have that kind of propaganda and also have what's going on now, is where it doesn't matter what your government leaders say. World Health Organization says you have a lockdown, so you have a lockdown. So it's a whole different political environment now.
So how do you talked about solutions, things techniques or tactics, and what is it going to take to overcome, Fort Orthodox, as it were? You talked about, just explain cross-bubble conversations, and also how to undermine the total monopolization of the narrative, basically, that we have, that we're kind of facing, especially on this issue.
Well, I need to say that it is much, much easier to understand a problem than it is to have a solution. So like even in my book, How We People Can Change the World, well, that book presented a theory of how we might build strong communities and gradually build up a bottom-up society and all that. And so I documented it, but it turns out it didn't work. I mean, the things I proposed in the book actually were tried, like in British Columbia. And I joined with some other activists there, and we tried having these, what we call wisdom councils and stuff. But it just didn't work. And, it's not easy to change the world. In fact, you could say you're sort of an idiot if you think you can, but so in that article, I was thinking, well, if only we could find a way to have conversations between, let's say, people that you might call conspiracy theorists and people who believe in the mainstream media, if they could actually converse without calling each other names and calling each other idiots, but actually would listen to one another, conceivably that might be some kind of progress. It might lead to some kind of opening up of public thinking. And so in the article, I try to explore how might it be possible to have such conversations. And so I talk about instead of if somebody says, we're all going to die of COVID, to say, no, we won't, it's all a scam, is not the right thing to say. Instead, maybe say, oh, really, do you think, where do you get that idea? I mean, how bad do you think it is? Dialogue, ask questions rather than contradicting people, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so it's a theory I'm putting out there, saying maybe we could learn to talk to one another. But I can't say it's going to work and it would make a difference. I just don't know. Like I said, it's so much easier to see the problem and see what the people at the top are up to and their tricks and how they do propaganda. It's much easier to see all that than it is to say, here's how we could counteract it.
Yeah. A lot of people asking that question, actually, Rich. I notice I've had some, Zoom chats with people during lockdown, and there was a real, desire to want to have a really, good conversation because a lot of people felt they were being, steamrolled and inundated with polarity, and people were shouting at each other, and it's more polarized than ever. There's different reasons for that. But what I do see that this issue, more than any other issue before, has brought people that I would have considered mainstream, Richard, into contact and dialogue with people that they would have considered to be conspiracy theorists just a year ago. And that to me is a great opportunity, and it's producing quite fruitful results at the moment. Mm-hmm. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that, if you're seeing the same thing. Well,
a lot of times I'll come across people saying, oh, good, people are waking up. There's a great waking up happening, And unfortunately, I see that this waking up phenomenon, it might grow a bit, and it might become a bigger minority. But it really is still fringe compared to the great majority. I mean, okay, like here in Wexford, a lot of the people I talk to, they're very hip people, and a lot of even though a lot of them never went to university or anything, they have a lot of independent thinking and follow a lot of things on the internet, and but still, in fact, I'd say it's a higher percentage of people kind of know what's going on here in this little town than in Silicon Valley, by far. But still, it's still a minority. You walk down the street, and more than half the people are wearing their masks. See, masks aren't even required here if you're walking down the street. They're only required if you go inside a shop or something.
Yes, yes.
And yet, more than half the people are walking down the street wearing their masks. So they're not waking up. They're scared. You know, they believe all the stuff. That they think that if the Irish Times says there's 430 new cases, they believe it. They're not aware that the tests they use are totally unreliable. So yeah, some people are waking up, and if the more they do, that's encouraging. But it's still only fringe, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And so you'd have to breach, for Orthodox, if you were, the walls would have to be breached at a mainstream media level where you might have a dissenting faction amongst the major broadcasters or editors who might end up doing something that catches fire like a brush fire, basically, in terms of awareness or a talking point or some spark that hits the tinder, as it were.
Yeah. Now, of course, when internet first came along, it was a great liberator. Lots and lots of people got exposed to all kinds of information and insights. I'd say there was a huge waking up in numbers just from the internet. Like I remember before, long time ago, I wanted to find radical thinking, people thinking outside the box. There was a little magazine called The Realist from Paul Krasner. And, you'd subscribe to The Realist, you'd get it in the mail, it'd be this thin little thing on crazy paper. And that's all that was all I had. There just wasn't, but once internet came along, then you had all these sources and all these different voices and all this available information. It was wonderful. A great awakening. But now they've found a way to manage Facebook and YouTube and all this community guidelines, getting things taken down. They've now found a way to turn that into a propaganda channel as well, which is very unfortunate.
Yeah, I remember when the Covert Action magazine, and you had the Ramparts and a lot of these anti-war publications. I mean, I regard New Dawn, Richard, as one of the last surviving print publications. One of the last in the world, really, in terms of a widely distributed alternative print publication. I mean, it's just so rare. But there used to be tons of them.
I guess there's Nexus too.
Yes, yeah, Nexus in Australia, yeah.
Is it New Dawn's Australia, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, they're based in Australia.
Do you have any idea what their circulation is?
It's very widely circulated in Australia and New Zealand. It's on, finer newsstands and bookstores as well right. As they have also a subscription by the post, and they have the digital edition as well. We've got a link to the digital edition on the show page right now for the Great Reset edition. But yeah, it's pretty well read, I think, widely read by a lot of influential people, actually. I think in Australia. I mean, I've run into people that I would consider, highly educated Australians. Then they know about New Dawn. They read it. A few of them subscribe to it.
That's strange that Australia seems to be where they're experimenting with the most intrusive of all enforcement of lockdowns and stuff. So
it is.
They're seeing what they can get by with there, and then I assume that we're going to all get hit with it eventually.
Oh, yes, yeah. It's a very important beta testing ground, Richard.
Yeah.
Very important.
Now, there's one thought I wanted to share.
Sure.
Because it's just something I thought of the other day. See, one of the things I'll always comment on when I have a chance to comment on is how such and such is a step toward the new world order, a step toward world government. And I realized COVID isn't a step toward world government, it's an example of world government. Because here you have this globalist institution, called the World Health Organization, which is not made up of medical people at all. It's a bureaucracy. It's responsible for looking into medical issues. This unelected, non-transparent, unaccountable globalist institution announces, supposedly on a scientific basis, that there's this pandemic and we've got to do certain things to respond to it. And then governments everywhere, except maybe Sweden, are helpless to oppose it. They, that is what technocracy, global government is going to be like, is these globalist institutions which claim to be acting on a scientific basis, but are totally unaccountable, announce policy, and then it gets implemented, and there is no political process. Governments have no role in it. Welcome. This is the New World Order. We are here.
A lot of people would say that, people who are opponents of the European Union would regard the EU as this kind of superstructure, non-elected superstructure that really sets the legal, the laws, the agenda, the social agenda, everything, regulatory agenda for all of the individual member states, which themselves are democracies, elect their own leaders and council people and so forth. But the World Health Organization is even a more opaque bureaucracy than even the EU in a sense, because it's a kind of like a scientific dictatorship. They lay the policy down, and everyone it's completely normalized across all countries. Like the policy recommendations come down from the WHO, and everyone's adopting them.
Right.
It's incredible.
And I'm so disappointed in Russia, because Russia was, I thought, in some sense, opposing the New World Order, holding back the United States from its aggressive postures and stuff like that. But now with COVID here, there's Russia coming up with the first vaccine, and they're totally playing along. So I thought Russia was going to help us, but I guess not.
I have a theory behind that, and the way I look at it, this type of a crisis, COVID crisis, or any infectious disease crisis, if you look back at history, it always the pendulum of the zeitgeist, it always leans towards authoritarianism amid a pandemic. So if there are authoritarian tendencies within a government or a state, they will be amplified greatly in this kind of pandemic climate. So it brings out, the most, whatever the quality is, the salient quality of the state, the government, it's amplified by the, quote, pandemic. So that Russia is, by its nature, much more authoritarian than most European countries, but it's been made that way. And part of it's because of the disaster of the 1990s that the U.S. helped to engineer in post-Soviet Russia. That's created the kind of, police state, as it were, of modern Russia.
Well, I would not agree that Russia is a police state. I consider that propaganda. But
police state tendencies compared to a Western country, like the more government control over speech and assembly and things like this.
I don't know. I'd say police shooting people, not just black people, but this militarized police shooting everybody. I think that happens in the United States and not in Russia.
Oh, absolutely. I agree.
I think
100%.
the United States is more of a police state. But we're going down a rabbit hole here, my friend. We don't really.
Yeah, but take China, for instance. China's a single party state, and there's no accountability. It's very opaque in terms of, like, if the Chinese government lays down a policy, there's no debate.
There's no comparison. No, China, I don't even think the concept of human rights even exists in China. I don't even think, human rights, what's that? China has been an empire for 5,000 years. it's totally state control. I mean, it's no. Let's not put Russia and China. Russia is a European country. China is an Asian country. They're really totally. They shouldn't be put in the same box at all.
No. I'm a great lover a great friend of Russia, by the way. But I'm just saying, this type of a situation, if you have a strong central government, it will use it. It will take hold of the situation and use it to show that it is efficient and it's strong and it can make, firm decisions, like have a big vaccine rollout and things like this.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Except that in this whole New World Order project, I think everything, it's not a matter, there's no opportunism going on. It's all planned. I mean, if you look at the Great Reset, the stuff on the Rockefeller website talking about Great Reset and stuff, it was already up there on the website saying, okay, let's see, we're going to have a pandemic and here's the possible responses to it, and we'll have a lockdown. I mean, it was all documented before it happened. And it's like this, okay, is it time to release the virus? Yeah, let's release it, So it was all, there's no opportunism involved in this case. It was all planned. And then when I look at Russia's response, I say, well, okay, so they were in on it. Otherwise, RT would be talking about how it's all fake and how the tests aren't really working. Tests can't really be trusted. They'd be coming out like they did, you look at what happened in Ukraine and, all these places where the United States and Russia were saying opposite stories. If Russia weren't in on it, they would be arguing against it. And instead, they're working on vaccines. So that means they were in on it.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. That's true. Or they realize that if they don't control this narrative within their own borders, but doing it their own way, that the international, the global government structure is going to impose it on them from outside, in a globalized, connected world, I suppose. So
that's another interpretation. How much more time have we got?
Oh, we just got a couple minutes left, but yeah, we're gonna wind this segment up in a minute. I want to give you final words, any final thoughts before we wrap it up. Well,
maybe we need another interview, but I wanted to get into the process, the geopolitical things that are happening, leading toward world government, and how the United States is being intentionally an asshole on the international stage so as to unify everybody against it. Mm-hmm. And say, in order to hold the United States back from starting a nuclear war, we've got to all get together in the UN, and that kind of thing. That whole scenario, I think, is worth discussion on its own.
Right. So usurping the U.S. as the kind of unipolar world hegemon by it having its reputation systematically tarnished. It's kind of an intentional.
Yeah, and also see if you proposed to anybody, to the United Nations anyway, hey, let's have a world government. They say, are you kidding? It would be dominated by the U.S.
Right.
Just like the UN is dominated by the U.S. We can't, that'd be surrender to U.S. imperialism. So before anybody can see world government as being a good idea, the United States has got to be basically put out of the picture. It's got to be totally humbled, unable to fund its foreign bases anymore, and the troops start coming home. All that kind of stuff would have to happen before anybody would trust any kind of giving sovereignty to global institutions.
So you think that this current, crisis, which is actually bankrupting the U.S. right now, could be, working towards that end to bring the U.S. down to the same level as, let's say, other countries, Europe, for instance?
Well, there's two things about the U.S. First, the U.S. has been bankrupt for a long, long time. All it would take is some for the bankers to declare, oh, by the way, the U.S. is bankrupt. The dollar's now worth nothing. I mean, it's already true. It's just a matter of acknowledging it. It's like the only reason the United States is still operating because the banks still keep loaning them money, even though it's like somebody's credit. They have 20 credit cards and they're all totally at their limits, and they say, oh, well, here's a new credit card just for you. And when that one's full, I'll give you another credit card. I mean, that's how the United States has been bankrupt a long time. The other thing is this whole Trump thing. I mean, Trump was put in office for the purpose of totally dividing the American people. I don't think they really count votes. I mean, who knows who wins the election? They don't have exit polls anymore, so you don't have any idea who voted for who. So they just, I've got an ideal formula. We're going to give Trump the Electoral College, and we're going to give Hillary the majority vote. That'll sure get them all going at each other's throats. I mean, what a plan. And then Trump spends his whole presidency doing nothing but antagonize the left. That's his whole job, antagonize the left. So now we're getting to a point where Pelosi is already saying what we need is the 25th Amendment that creates a committee which then is going to decide who gets to be a candidate and who doesn't. Right? So the United States its political system is going to totally implode besides its bankruptcy being recommended. Being identified. So you can see the United States is falling apart.
Yes, I do. I do worry about the republic being able to be held together based on a lot of things that we've seen, especially in the last couple of years. So we shall see. I don't think it's gonna get any better in the next couple of months. I think it's gonna get more polarized, and I hope we'll see if it survives through Christmas, Richard.
Well, unfortunately,
all bets are off.
Yeah, well, that committee that Pelosi wants that gets to vet candidates, I've got a good name for it. The Politburo.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Yeah, and decide if they're mentally fit, right? That's part of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, once you have a vetting committee, then you now have government by committee. I mean, it's the whole concept of candidates and elections and the whole Republican vision is dead.
Yeah.
It's gone. It's gone.
It's very Soviet-esque.
It is. I mean, both the Third Reich and the Soviet Union were both experiments run by the bankers to see, try different methods of social control. And the Soviet one is the one that they decided to go with, and that's where they're taking us.
Mm.
That's when like people talk about guaranteed income. Well, guaranteed, gee, that sounds good, doesn't it? Guaranteed income? Well, what does that mean? Guaranteed income means you're a slave of the state.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're probably going over time here, but I've really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this, Patrick. So.
Yeah. No, thank you, Richard. And there's a few rabbit holes that we could go further down. Definitely, universal basic income is one of them.
Well, if you ever want to do another interview, I enjoy it. So just let me know.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a link to your blog and where your book is also there on the show page right now, and also a link to the latest special edition of New Dawn magazine, The Great Reset. And thank you very much. And it's been great meeting you and also talking with you this week on the Sunday Wire, Richard.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There he goes, ladies and gentlemen, as Richard K. Moore. And you can see links to his work on the show page right now. And we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back to say goodbye and wrap everything up in just a couple minutes. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. This is the Sunday Wire. Stick around. We'll be right back.
If there's one thing I've learned about experts, they're experts on fuck all. If there's a rule, you can bend it. If there's a law, it can be broken. And from now on, I'm breaking all the rules. Because desperate men do desperate deeds.
All right. Welcome back to the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. Just a brief overdrive segment here before we send the spaceship on its way. And very fantastic segment with Richard K. Moore. If you missed any of the live broadcast, or if you're just joining us late and you missed any of the last segment or any of the first hour, you can always catch us up on the podcasting platforms on iTunes, on 21st Century Wire, of course, Spreaker.com. There's where all the ACR programming lives, up on Spreaker, Alternate Current Radio Pro channel there. Up on Spreaker, we'll have all of the great programs, The Boiler Room, Ruckus, all of the great music shows. They're all up there at the Alternate Current Radio's mothership, up on Spreaker.com. Join the community and also support ACR. There's a link to Alternate Current Radio at the top of our show page. You go there and you'll have options to donate or become a patron. ACR needs your support. It's a fantastic independent platform. And so go there to support all the great programming, including this show, which is hosted on the great Alternate Current Radio Network as well. Now, we'll just send off in a minute, but I just wanted to touch on, and we give experts a hard time on this show. We give experts a hard time, and we joke about the experts. And you know what? You could be an expert on something. You could think you're an expert on something, but I guarantee you there's 100 people out there who aren't, quote, experts, but might know more than you on that subject, even if you have a master's or a PhD in it in some cases. So the term expert, well, it's not something I'm comfortable with anybody using when they introduce me, even on subjects and topics that I have studied and have written extensively or even have firsthand experience in. So I don't like the term expert. I like the term analyst. As an analyst, I would try my hardest to analyze, to extrapolate, to deconstruct, or to describe, to put things in context. This is what an analyst is supposed to do. But not an expert. That's almost a damaged term now. It's almost as damaged as journalist. That's also a damaged brand because of our wonderful friends in the mainstream media who've done such great things for the reputation of journalists. So I put out a tweet this morning, which I want people to think about. If you've watched the coverage on, especially CNN, of course, because CNN very much represents the deep state. It represents the intelligence agencies. It represents the Pentagon. That's who CNN. It's very tightly controlled editorial lines on everything. Every single word that is put out on that network is very carefully sculpted for a certain type of messaging on these various issues, and all the pundits, and they pay them millions of dollars each so that they get it absolutely perfect. They're highly paid, highly skilled propagandists at CNN. And they're going on this week, the last 2 weeks, about Trump is a super spreader. Trump's a super spreader. They had super spreader events at the White House, and it's absolutely outrageous. There are people circulating. Some people weren't wearing masks. It's terrible. And this is such irresponsible behavior by the president. We can't righteous indignation all the way around 24/7 for the last 2 weeks on CNN. But you know what? CNN is the super spreader. CNN is a super spreader of fake news and propaganda. And I say CNN, everybody working there needs to be quarantined. They need to shut it down to stop that virus from spreading uncontrollably. Because that is the real pandemic, is the pandemic of fake news and propaganda, egregious propaganda, malicious propaganda that's been promulgated through CNN, cable news network. They are the super spreaders. So we should treat them the way they are saying that super spreaders need to be treated, quarantined and shut down permanently in this case, because they're that dangerous. They cause wars. The fake news, the virus that they're spreading, the virus of propaganda and fake news, causes wars. It causes hundreds of thousands, millions of people, innocent people, to lose their lives. Whole countries have been destroyed on the back of CNN's super spreading exploits over the last 40 years. Make no mistake about it. They are the real pandemic. Them, MSNBC, and to maybe a lesser degree, the New York Times and the Washington Post, but especially CNN, they're probably the worst. They're the worst on the planet. They're the worst in the history of media. That's right. They're the worst in the whole history of media on this planet. Nobody is worse than CNN in spreading the virus of propaganda and fake news. 100%, that's their job. So I'm just throwing that out there as a nice little talking point. CNN are super spreaders. Get out there and hashtag that. Super spreaders of fake news and propaganda need to be quarantined, must be shut down immediately. And it will save lives. I guarantee it. I am not kidding. That might sound like a joke, but I'm dead serious. Shutting down CNN would save a lot of lives globally. A lot of innocent people would have their lives spared if CNN was shut down for their super spreading exploits. So think about that this weekend. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. Oh, there's one last thing. I mean, just to underline this point. One of MSNBC's most highly paid anchors, I don't think he's with them anymore. His name's Keith Olbermann. And if you remember Keith Olbermann, he was like the resistance against the Bush administration. He's really a sports commentator. And he called sports. He called ball games, basically. He did play-by-play or whatever, 11 o'clock sports highlights, ESPN, I forgot who he worked for. But he got into politics with, opposing the Bush administration. In fair play, that was a noble cause at the time, opposing the neocons. And he gained a reputation for himself. But when Trump came along, Trump derangement syndrome has affected Keith Olbermann more than really anybody. I think it's actually driven him around the bend. He has literally lost it. Either he's acting, and this is just an incredible acting job, or he is suffering from acute Trump derangement syndrome. So severe that it's impaired his motor functions. That's really serious. So we have a clip. Listen to this. He just released this on his own YouTube channel. This is Keith Olbermann, former anchor at MSNBC. I don't know what he's doing now, but listen to this, Screed. This is incredible.
The nation and all of our freedoms hang by a thread, and the military apparatus of this country is about to be handed over to scum, who are beholden to scum, Russian scum. As things are today, January 20th will not be an inauguration, but rather the end of the United States as an independent country. It will not be a peaceful change of power. It will be a usurpation, and the usurper has no validity, no credibility, and no authority under the Constitution. This is a reality that will become the only reality until this country rids itself of Donald John Trump. He is not a president. He is a puppet put in power by Vladimir Putin. And those who ignore these elemental existential facts, Democrats or Republicans, are traitors to this country. and will immediately and forever after be held accountable. Resist. Peace.
That's just no. That's one of a few of these rants circulating. I mean, he has to be acting, because if he's really in that frame of mind, you really have to be. You got to believe in the whole echo chamber reality bubble thing, because he's really in it big time. So we're worried about you, Keith. We're worried about you. Come back off the edge. Come back off the edge before it's too late, and come play back in the realms of normality, please. But this is incredible. Imagine that multi-million-dollar news anchor, and then they deteriorate to that state, and it's only been a couple of years. I mean, is that the effect that apparently that Trump? I think he was already kind of slightly unhinged before that, but wow, that's something else. That's special, actually. So you don't hear that every day. So people are losing it. People are losing touch with reality, and I dread to think what will happen if and when, it's looking like possibly when, Donald Trump wins re-election on November 3rd. They say Biden's ahead in the polls. I am not convinced. I'm not convinced. I see no enthusiasm for Joe. I see no crowds at his rallies. I haven't met anybody that's excited about his campaign. And then I look over on the Trump side, and he's packing out basketball arenas again, basically. Thousands of people. He's got his base is fired up. And so I compare the two, and it's just like I just don't see it. I don't see how that's happening. And there's a split in the Democratic Party. There's a never Trump contingent within the Republican Party. Absolutely, the John McCain and Mitt Romney Republicans, they'll vote Democrat just to get rid of Trump. But they're overall, I would say, in terms of the Republican electorate, they're a minority. Now, on the Democratic side, they have a serious problem, and I'll tell you why. And if you watch Nate Silver's Twitter feed, and some of the top pollsters, you're already getting a taste that there's something that's not fully baked about the way the press has been covering the Biden-Harris campaign. And quite simply, it's this. We're seeing pretty much a repeat of the 2016 run up to the 2016 election. And Trump was surging in August, and then Billy Bush weekend happened, and then he took a dive, and then he had a late surge. So we've got almost the same thing happening now. Instead of Billy Bush weekend, the Access Hollywood tapes, now we have the tax returns that sort of knocked Trump back, and then he got COVID, and now seems to be picking up again in the polls. So, but consistently, the mainstream media is reporting that Biden has a 14, 15-point lead right across the board. And it's exactly how they're reporting Hillary Clinton 4 years ago. The only difference is, and this is the kicker, 4 years ago, there was more unity in the Democratic Party for Hillary Clinton. Yes, there were a lot of scorned Bernie Sanders supporters that felt that they had been railroaded, but they more or less, a lot of them fell into line and voted Clinton late in the game. Now that's not the case. There's a lot of Bernie supporters. I see the burners online. Their attitude towards Biden is, I don't like him, and I don't really want to vote for him. So think about it. The perfect scenario there would be for that block of people, which is in the millions nationwide, in the millions. They were looking for any excuse to not vote for Biden, to have that on their conscience. And the easiest get out clause is that he's going to win anyway. Because if I look at the mainstream polling, he's already ahead. He's got it in the bag. And so that will keep some of the burners at home. That's a fact. They don't like Biden. Some of them hate Biden. And the over-reporting in terms of the exaggeration of potential exaggeration of Biden support will keep a lot of those voters from voting for Biden. They'll just sit this one out. And so you could have a bigger, more dark matter in 2020 in terms of those intangibles than you had in 2016. And you couple that with clear polling, mainstream polling that says a lot of people will not disclose they're voting for Trump when they're talking to pollsters. This was an anonymous poll. So if you have, a potential margin of error there that's just getting bigger and bigger, I think the Democrats are potentially in for a shock. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be an electoral landslide. I think it's going to be very close. I think it's going to be I think it's going to come down to one or two states on the Electoral College. That wasn't the case in 2016. It was an electoral landslide. Hillary took California. The majority of her popular vote margin came from California, one state. So the Republicans have already written off California. It doesn't even factor in for them. Not for the presidency. It does, of course, for the House seats and maybe a run at a Senate seat. But for the president, they've written it off. But this will be close. It'll come down to one or two states. It will come down to Pennsylvania, Florida, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, something like that. And I think I see Trump with a very slim margin of one or two states. It will be that close. It will be that close. And it's going to be an absolute shocker for the Democrats. So we shall see. We'll see. Things could change. Something could happen. Black swans appear late. We'll see. We'll see. But I do see a lot of tea leaves that tell me that all is not what it seems as it's being reported right now in the media, and all hell will break loose, of course, if that happens. And all of the things that we talked about and warned about on this show come into play after that. So I'm just saying, buckle up, buckle up. It's going to get rough. It's going to get rough. Anyway, that's it for this week, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I also want to thank our guest, Richard K. Moore, in the second hour. And I want to thank everybody also who has supported or subscribes to 21st Century Wire, 21wire.tv. Our supporters and a few people have come on board as members, and we want to thank you very much. It's because of you that we're able to do what we do and to go ahead moving forward doing the work we do. And we've got so much work to do in the next couple of weeks. Obviously, this is election season, but we're fighting a big fight, and we need your support to keep that going. So thank you, everyone who has, and if you're thinking about supporting us, we will definitely love to have you on board to join the family at 21wire.tv. We definitely need your support going forward. But that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's the show. Thank you very much. And we shall see you this time next week, hopefully. Now we should have something special, hopefully lined up for you again. All the best. Have a great week.